This video is all about how to convert between percent and the decimal that percent represents. And I just want to point out here that even though we're talking about percent versus decimal, you can have a percent that is a decimal. So you could have 5.2%, for example, but that would look quite different from the actual decimal number that represents. So I just want to point that out. It's okay to have a decimal in a percent, and we would probably refer to that as a decimal percent, but I'm just going to call it percent. So first of all, what does percent mean? Well, we know percent means per 100, and that also means divide by 100. So it means basically this, and this is going to help us with our conversion. So to demonstrate the relationship between these two types of numbers, let's look at an example that you would be familiar with, so taking a test. This test is out of 30 marks, and we're going to look at three hypothetical students, one that scored 30 marks, one that scored 15, and one that scored no marks. So this student over here, they did very well. They got the full amount of marks possible, so they actually scored 100%. Looking at this student over here, perhaps this student missed classes, didn't catch up on the work, or they fell asleep at the start of the test. This student did not do well. They got no marks out of 30, so they actually scored 0%. This student in between, they got 15 marks out of the possible 30 marks, so they got exactly half the amount of marks that they could have gotten. And this basically means that they've scored 50% on this test. So let's have a look now at what that means as a decimal. So we've looked at percent. As a decimal, this particular student, they scored 30 out of a total of 30 marks. Now that's a fraction, but let's turn it into a decimal by saying how many 30s in 30? There are 1. So this is the decimal number. And I know it doesn't look like it's got a decimal point in it, but there it is. And you could even put in some zeros after it. But that's the decimal. So it's 100% is the same as 1 as a decimal. This one here, 15 marks out of 30, looks like this as a fraction. And how many 30s in 15? There's only half. So that looks like a 0.5. So this is the decimal number for 50%. And this one here, 0 marks out of 30. How many 30s in 0? There's none. So this is the decimal number. You can just write it as 0 if you want, but I've put in the decimal point and some zeros just to put it into context. So looking at these three results, 100% means 1, 50% means 0.5, and 0% means 0. And I'm just going to get rid of these percent signs and look at just the number. So from here, 100 to 1, this looks 100 times smaller. This also is 100 times smaller, and in terms of converting, this one here is also 100 times smaller. This is a key point. Decimal numbers, these ones over here, are always going to look 100 times smaller than the percent numbers, these ones. This can help you keep track of which way you're moving your decimal point. Remember, percent looks bigger and decimals look smaller. Now mathematically, they're the same because this symbol here, this percent sign, means divide by 100. That symbol is part of that mathematical conversion that makes these two numbers actually the same value. Let's take 24.5% and let's look at what it looks like as a decimal. So see that? 100 times smaller, and also this percent sign disappeared. If you want to convert it back, you make it look 100 times bigger and you put the percent sign in. So changing it to a decimal, changing it to a percent. What if we don't have a decimal point? Well, this really isn't a problem because any number, even if it doesn't have a decimal point, really does have an invisible one that sits over here at the end of it. So we can just put that decimal point in and jump it 2 spaces to the left. And also notice we didn't have a number here, but we just fill up that particular space with a 0, meaning that there is no tenths in this number. Okay, converting back to a percentage, it would look like this. So making it 100 times bigger, putting in the percent sign. 100 times smaller, taking out the percent sign. 100 times bigger, putting in the percent sign, and so on and so forth. Now we're going to practice turning some percent numbers into some decimal numbers. So remember, to remove a percent sign, we need to actually use it to get rid of it, which means we actually have to do the division by 100. So what that looks like is removing the percent sign and doing the division by 100. So moving that decimal point over 2 spaces so that 20% becomes 0.2. You can write the 0 here, but you don't have to. 3% becomes 0.03 or 0.03, but just make sure that you are not tempted to just go 0.3 because that would actually be 30%. No, this is only 3%, so that 0 does need to go in there. 17.8% becomes 0.178. This one here, we're removing the percent sign again, we're moving this over twice, so it means we need to put in that extra 0. 12% becomes 0.12, 87% becomes 0.87, 99% becomes 0.99, and this one here, again, removing the percent sign, jumping the point over twice, becomes 1.25. Now, this makes sense in terms of that first example where that 100% score on a test meant 1 as a decimal number. Here, 125%, that's more than 100%, so here this is more than 1, so that's fine. Okay, it's your turn to practice, so please pause the video, have a go, and then resume to see if you got the correct answers. So how did you go? Did you put in these extra zeros here? It's great if you did. Down here, 110%. Now you can write it as 1.10, but equally you can just write it as 1.1. That's fine too. Okay, let's look now at turning some decimal numbers into some percent numbers. So we are now needing to put in the percent sign. Now remember, the percent sign means divide by 100. So to sort of counteract that, we actually are multiplying by 100. That's why we're moving the decimal point now in the opposite direction from before. So 0.82, we are jumping that decimal point over 2 to the right, and it becomes 82%. Here, jumping 2 to the right, this becomes 150%. 2 to the right, it becomes 3.9%. 20.7%. Remember this example, this is our 100%. 0.06%. 24.5%, and 190%. Okay, it's your turn. Please pause the video, copy this down, have a go, and then resume. I hope this video has really helped you build your confidence in changing between percent and decimals and back again. In each case, you're moving the decimal point 2 spaces, and you just need to remember which direction you're going for which particular conversion. And it can help to remember that the percent number looks 100 times bigger than the decimal number. Make sure to practice this skill once in a while to keep it fresh in your mind. And thanks for watching.